Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The stranger who knew my name. What would you do if a complete stranger looked at you in a crowded American coffee shop and said your name before you had ever introduced yourself? I still remember the exact moment. I was sitting alone, tired from work, struggling with my English, and quietly wondering whether real love was something that happened to other people. Then a man walked toward my table, smiled, and said, "You're Emma, right?" I froze. I had never seen him before. At least, I thought I had never seen him before. It was an ordinary afternoon in the United States, the kind filled with traffic, coffee cups, laptops, people rushing somewhere, and everyone pretending they were not exhausted. I was practicing simple English sentences in my notebook because speaking English still made me nervous. I had written, "I want to speak with confidence." Then I underlined the word confidence 3 times, as if my pen could magically install it in my brain. That was when he appeared. He was holding a coffee and looking at me with a strangely familiar smile. "Sorry," he said. "Are you Emma?" I almost laughed because my first thought was, this is how every suspicious story begins. But he was not a stranger in the way I first imagined. He worked in the same large office building, and apparently we had passed each other many times without noticing. He knew my name because he had seen it on a company event list. That explanation should have made the moment completely normal. Somehow, it did not. We started talking. At first, our conversation was simple. "How was your day? Are you working late? Do you come here often?" These were ordinary English sentences, but I was secretly proud that I could answer without mentally translating every word. Then he asked me a question that stopped me completely. "Why do you always look like you are trying to solve a problem?" I laughed. Nobody had ever described me that way. I told him, maybe because I am always thinking. He smiled and said, "I noticed." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was romantic. It was because he had noticed something about me that most people ignored. Over the next few weeks, our conversations became longer. We talked about work, food, family, weekends, American habits, and the strange little things people do every day without realizing it. I began to feel comfortable around him, and that scared me more than attraction ever had. I had been hurt before. I did not believe in perfect love anymore. Yet there was something about this man that felt familiar before it felt romantic. Then one evening, just as I was beginning to wonder if this connection meant something, he told me a secret about why he had first noticed me. And suddenly, our chance meeting did not seem like a chance at all. One conversation changed everything. The secret he told me should have made me walk away. Instead, I stayed. He looked at me across the small coffee table and said, "I noticed you because you were crying here one night." I was stunned. I had completely forgotten that evening. I had been sitting in the same cafe after a terrible day, trying to understand an email from work, fighting tears, and pretending to be busy with my phone. He had seen me from across the room. He said he wanted to help, but he did not know whether I wanted a stranger to interrupt my sadness. So he waited. That answer changed something inside me. Most people notice when you look happy. Very few notice when you are quietly falling apart. I asked him why he remembered me. He smiled and said, "Because you looked like someone who needed a little kindness, not advice." I did not know what to say. My English suddenly felt very small. I wanted to explain everything, but all I could manage was, "Thank you." He answered, "That is enough." Those 3 words made me laugh. I had spent years believing that good English meant speaking long, impressive sentences. But that evening taught me something different. Sometimes the simplest sentence carries the most meaning. Thank you. I understand. I am tired. I need time. These became the kinds of English sentences I practiced later, because they belonged to real life. Our friendship grew slowly. We met for coffee after work. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes we talked for 10 minutes because one of us had somewhere to be. We discovered that we both liked quiet weekends, simple food, long walks, and laughing at things that were not supposed to be funny. He had a habit of making jokes when conversations became too serious. Once, I told him I was afraid of making mistakes in English. He said, "Good. Then we already have something in common. I make mistakes in English too." I laughed so hard that coffee almost came out of my nose. It was not exactly a romantic moment, but somehow it was better. I felt safe enough to be imperfect. That mattered. I had always imagined a soulmate as someone who could read my mind, finish my sentences, and magically understand everything. But this man did something much more practical. He asked questions. He listened. He remembered small details. He never made me feel stupid when I searched for a word. And slowly, I started wondering whether that was what a soulmate really meant. Not perfection. Recognition. Not magic. Attention. But just when I began trusting that feeling, he asked me one question that completely changed the direction of our relationship. He looked at me and said, "What are you really afraid of when it comes to love?" I had an answer. I just wasn't ready to say it. Love does not look like movies. The truth I was afraid to say was simple. I was terrified of being loved again. Not because I hated love, but because I knew how much it could hurt when it disappeared. When he asked me what I feared, I looked down at my coffee and finally said, "I am afraid you will leave." He did not laugh. He did not give me a perfect romantic speech. He simply said, "Then we should not make promises we cannot keep." Somehow, that answer made me trust him more. Real life in America did not suddenly turn into a romantic movie. We still had busy workdays, traffic, grocery shopping, family responsibilities, and weekends that disappeared faster than my phone battery. Our relationship grew inside ordinary life, not candlelight and slow music. That was when I began to understand something important about love. A soulmate does not necessarily arrive with fireworks. Sometimes he arrives with a coffee, a question, and the patience to listen when your English is not perfect. I was still practicing English every day. I would write short sentences in my notebook and read them aloud. I am nervous. I feel safe. I like being with you. They were simple sentences, but they helped me express emotions without hiding behind complicated words. He never corrected every little mistake. Instead, he listened to what I meant. That made me brave enough to speak more. We also began noticing our differences. I liked planning everything. He believed some problems could wait until tomorrow. I wanted dinner at a certain time. He could somehow survive on leftovers at 10 at night and call it a meal. I worried about small details. He sometimes reminded me to breathe. These differences were funny at first, but eventually they became real tests. One evening, we had our first serious argument. I wanted him to understand why something mattered to me. He thought I was criticizing him. My words became faster, my English became worse, and suddenly I could not explain what I actually felt. I walked away angry. Later, I sat alone and wrote in my journal, I wanted to be understood, but I forgot to understand. That sentence stayed with me. Psychology often talks about emotional regulation, the ability to pause before reacting when emotions become intense. I was learning that lesson in real time. I did not need to win every conversation. I needed to understand what was happening inside me before asking someone else to understand it. The next morning, I apologized. He apologized too. We did not become perfect. We simply became more honest. And that honesty made our connection stronger. But just when I thought our relationship had survived its first real test, something happened at his family's home that made me question whether love alone could overcome the differences between our two worlds. The first time I felt safe. The night I met his family, I smiled so much my cheeks actually hurt. Then his mother asked me one simple question, and suddenly every English word I knew disappeared from my brain. She looked at me kindly and asked, "What do you love most about my son?" Easy question, right? Apparently not when your heart is racing and your vocabulary has decided to take the evening off. I laughed nervously and said, "I love how he makes me feel safe." The room became quiet for 1 second. Then she smiled. "That is a good answer," she said. I felt my shoulders relax. That small moment taught me something I would remember for years. Feeling safe with someone is often more powerful than feeling excited by someone. His family life was different from mine in many small ways. They talked loudly, interrupted each other, joked constantly, and somehow turned a simple dinner into what felt like a live comedy show. I was used to thinking carefully before speaking because I worried about making English mistakes. But around them, I slowly stopped monitoring every sentence. If I used the wrong word, someone laughed kindly, explained it, and moved on. I began learning English through real conversations instead of memorized phrases. One night, his father asked me, "Are you comfortable here?" I understood every word. I answered, "Yes. I feel at home." Later, I wrote that sentence in my notebook. I feel at home. It was simple English, but it carried a feeling I had never expected. I also learned that American family life is not one single experience. Every family has its own habits, boundaries, traditions, humor, and way of showing love. Some families hug often. Some tease each other. Some speak openly about problems. Others need more privacy. There is no single American formula for a happy family. What mattered to me was learning how to respect differences without turning them into threats. My relationship with him became deeper because I stopped asking, "Are we exactly alike?" and started asking, "Can we understand each other?" That question changed everything. I began noticing how he treated people when nobody was watching. He thanked servers. He called his parents. He helped clean after dinner without waiting to be asked. He remembered small promises. None of these things looked dramatic. But those small behaviors told me more about his character than any romantic speech could. I began to understand why people sometimes call someone a soulmate. Maybe it is not because the universe sends you a perfect person. Maybe it is because, over time, you recognize someone whose values make you feel safe enough to become yourself. But there was still one problem. Feeling safe while dating was one thing. Building a real life together was another. And when we started talking seriously about marriage, I discovered a side of our relationship that neither of us had prepared for. When love became real, I thought finding my soulmate would be the difficult part. I was wrong. The difficult part was discovering whether two people who loved each other could actually build a peaceful life together. When my boyfriend and I started talking seriously about marriage, romance suddenly became very practical. We talked about money, work, schedules, family expectations, children, and who would cook when both of us were exhausted. Nothing kills a romantic fantasy faster than discussing a broken washing machine. But those conversations mattered. I learned that real love is not only about how someone makes your heart beat. It is also about how you feel when life becomes inconvenient. We were living in the United States, surrounded by the ordinary rhythm of American life, busy jobs, long commutes, grocery stores, school schedules, weekend errands, and endless notifications. We had good days, but we also had tired days. Sometimes I wanted quiet. Sometimes he wanted to talk. Sometimes I wanted him to understand immediately, while he needed time to think. Our differences became more obvious as the relationship became more serious. One evening, we argued about money. It was not a dramatic argument, but it revealed something important. I felt anxious about the future. He felt that I did not trust him. I went to my room and opened my English notebook. Instead of writing a long explanation, I wrote, "I am worried about our future." Then I added, "I need us to plan together." I read the sentences slowly. They were simple, but they helped me separate fear from accusation. When we talked again, I said exactly what I had written. He listened. Then he said, "I want to plan with you." That sentence calmed me more than a romantic promise could have. I began to understand that communication is not about using perfect English or perfect words. It is about making your meaning clear enough for another person to hear it. Research on relationships often emphasizes the importance of communication, emotional responsiveness, and feeling understood. I was learning those ideas without sitting in a classroom. My marriage education was happening at the kitchen table. We also talked about children. We both wanted a family, but we knew children would change everything. Love would become louder, messier, more expensive, and probably involve someone screaming because their banana had been cut incorrectly. Still, we wanted that life. So we made a choice. We would not promise each other a perfect marriage. We would promise to keep talking, keep learning, and keep choosing each other when life became difficult. That promise felt more realistic than the idea of destiny. Yet our biggest test had not arrived. After we married and began building our family, one difficult year would make me question the soulmate idea completely. I would look at the man I once believed was my perfect match and wonder, did I choose the wrong person? Our hardest year together. I once looked at my husband across our kitchen table and thought, maybe soulmates are not real. The man who had once made me feel completely understood suddenly felt like a stranger. We were married, raising our children, working, paying bills, managing schedules, and trying to keep a normal home running. But we were exhausted. The romance had not disappeared in one dramatic moment. It had slowly been buried under ordinary life. One morning, our youngest child was crying, my phone was ringing, breakfast was burning, and my husband asked me a completely reasonable question. I answered like he had declared war. He stared at me. I stared back. Then we both realized how ridiculous we were and started laughing. That laugh helped, but the deeper problem remained. We were not fighting because we stopped loving each other. We were fighting because we were tired and had forgotten how to communicate when tired. I began noticing a pattern. When I felt stressed, I spoke quickly. When he felt criticized, he became quiet. His silence made me more anxious, so I talked even more. My talking made him withdraw further. Congratulations, we had accidentally invented our own emotional treadmill. I decided to slow the cycle down. Every night, I wrote 3 simple sentences in my journal. What happened today? How did I feel? What do I need? Then I read them aloud in English. This tiny routine helped me practice English listening and speaking, but more importantly, it gave my emotions a name before I brought them into a conversation. Instead of saying, "You never help me," I learned to say, "I felt overwhelmed today." Instead of, "You don't care," I tried, "I need more support." Those sentences sounded less dramatic, but they created more space for understanding. Relationship researchers often discuss the importance of emotional regulation and constructive communication during conflict. In simple words, when emotions become too intense, our brains become less interested in solving problems and more interested in protecting ourselves. I could feel that happening in my own life. So we started taking short pauses. Sometimes 10 minutes. Sometimes an hour. We came back when we were calmer. It was not glamorous. There were no movie soundtracks. There was usually laundry somewhere nearby. But slowly, something changed. My husband began telling me when he was overwhelmed instead of disappearing into silence. I began listening without preparing my defense. Our children noticed that the house felt calmer. We still disagreed, but disagreement stopped feeling like proof that our marriage was failing. I began to understand that a soulmate is not someone who prevents every storm. Maybe it is someone who learns how to stand beside you when the storm arrives. Then one evening, after a particularly difficult conversation, my husband said something that I never expected to hear. It was only 7 words, but those 7 words made me question everything I thought I knew about our marriage. The question that broke my heart. 7 words should not be powerful enough to make a grown woman sit completely still in her own kitchen, but my husband managed it. He looked at me after our hardest conversation and said, "Do you still choose me when life is hard?" I had no answer. Not because I did not love him, but because the question reached deeper than romance. I had spent years asking whether he was my soulmate, whether we were meant to be together, whether our connection was special. Suddenly, he was asking something much more uncomfortable. Was I willing to choose this marriage when it was inconvenient, exhausting, and imperfect? I went to bed without answering. The next morning, I opened my journal and wrote, "I love him, but I am tired." Then I stared at the sentence. It felt honest. I had always believed that admitting exhaustion might make my love look weaker. Instead, it made my feelings clearer. I was not tired of him. I was tired of carrying stress without explaining it. I was tired of expecting him to read my mind. I was tired of believing that a soulmate should somehow know exactly what I needed. That morning, I practiced another simple English sentence. I need you to listen. I said it slowly. I need you to listen. Then I said it to my husband. He did. No argument. No defense. Just listening. I told him about the pressure I felt, the fear of failing as a mother, the stress of daily responsibilities, and the quiet worry that our children might remember our difficult moments more than our happy ones. He listened until I finished. Then he told me he had been carrying his own fears. He was afraid he was not doing enough. Afraid that every mistake made him a bad husband. Afraid that I would eventually decide I deserved someone better. That confession broke my heart because I realized we had both been standing in the same storm, each secretly believing the other person was the storm. We hugged. It was not a perfect movie moment. One of our children walked into the room asking for a snack. Life apparently has excellent timing. We laughed through our tears. That day changed the way I understood love. A soulmate does not always remove your loneliness. Sometimes a soulmate gives you enough safety to admit that you are lonely. A healthy relationship does not mean 2 people never hurt each other. It means they become willing to repair what was hurt. I also stopped treating English mistakes like personal failures. When I could not find a word, I paused. When my pronunciation was imperfect, I tried again. Love taught me the same lesson. Slow down, listen, try again. Months later, our marriage felt different. Not perfect. Stronger. But there was one final test waiting for us. And it would force me to decide whether our story was really about destiny, or simply about 2 people choosing each other again. We chose each other again. The night I realized my husband was still my soulmate was not romantic at all. There were no candles, no expensive dinner, and definitely no dramatic music playing in the background. There was a pile of laundry on the couch, 2 tired children upstairs, and a sink full of dishes that seemed personally offended by us. I was exhausted. He was exhausted. Yet something had changed. We had stopped asking, who is wrong, and started asking, what do we need right now? That tiny change saved us more than any romantic gesture ever could. Our family life in the United States had become busy in ways we never fully expected. Work, school, appointments, groceries, bills, homework, cooking, cleaning, and the endless mystery of missing socks filled our days. Sometimes love had to compete with a calendar. Sometimes a meaningful conversation had to wait until the children were finally asleep. But we learned not to mistake busyness for the absence of love. We began creating small rituals. On Sunday mornings, we drank coffee together before the house became noisy. At night, we asked each other one simple question: how are you really feeling? Sometimes the answer was short. Sometimes it lasted 30 minutes. Sometimes we laughed because one of us was obviously too tired to form a complete sentence. I also continued my English practice. I wrote one short sentence each day about our family. We had a difficult morning. My daughter made me laugh. My husband helped me today. I am grateful for this family. Then I read each sentence aloud slowly. These were not advanced English lessons. They were real sentences from my real life. That made them easier to remember. Language researchers often emphasize that meaningful context helps learners connect new words with experiences. I could feel that happening. The word grateful was no longer just vocabulary. It became my husband making breakfast while I slept an extra 20 minutes. Patient became my daughter struggling with homework while I tried not to lose my mind. Together became 4 people sitting around one table. Our children also started noticing our efforts. They saw us apologize. They saw us disagree and then return to each other. They learned that love was not the absence of conflict. It was the willingness to repair. One evening, my husband handed me a small notebook. On the first page, he had written a sentence in English. His handwriting was terrible, which made me laugh before I even finished reading it. The sentence said, "I choose you again." I looked at him and realized something powerful. Maybe soulmates are not people who are magically destined to stay together. Maybe they are people who keep choosing each other with open eyes. That night, I wrote his sentence into my journal. But I added one more line underneath it. One sentence that would later become the most important sentence in our entire story. Are soulmates really real? What if I told you I stopped believing in soulmates at the exact moment I finally understood what one could mean? For years, I imagined a soulmate as one perfect person somewhere in the world, waiting for me, someone who would always understand me, never disappoint me, and somehow know what I needed before I said it. It sounded beautiful. It also sounded exhausting. Real life taught me something much more useful. My husband was not perfect. Neither was I. We misunderstood each other. We got tired. We made mistakes. We sometimes argued about things so small that, looking back, they were almost funny. But we learned how to repair. One Sunday afternoon, I sat at our kitchen table with my journal while our children played nearby. I opened the page where he had written, "I choose you again." Underneath it, I had written my own sentence, "I choose to understand you." I stared at those two sentences and suddenly saw our entire relationship differently. Maybe a soulmate is not someone who always agrees with you. Maybe it is someone who makes you want to become better at loving. Someone who challenges your impatience. Someone who teaches you to listen. Someone who sees your weaknesses without using them against you. That does not mean every relationship should be saved, or that difficult love is automatically healthy. Respect, safety, honesty, and mutual effort matter. But in our marriage, we had those things, and we were learning how to protect them. I also realized that my English journey had quietly followed the same path. In the beginning, I wanted perfect sentences. I wanted to speak without mistakes. I thought confidence would come after perfection. Instead, confidence came because I kept speaking despite mistakes. Love worked the same way. I did not become a better wife because I suddenly knew everything. I became better because I kept learning. I learned to say, "I am sorry." I learned to say, "I need help." I learned to say, "I do not understand." I learned to say, "Tell me what you feel." These simple sentences became powerful tools in our home. Our children heard them too. They learned that adults can apologize. They learned that love can survive disagreement. They learned that family is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about creating a place where people can be honest and still feel loved. That evening, my husband came into the kitchen and asked what I was writing. I smiled and closed the journal. "Nothing," I said. He laughed. That usually means something. I opened the page and showed him my sentence. He read it slowly. Then he looked at me and said, "Then I guess we have to keep choosing each other." I nodded. But there was one final realization I had not yet shared with him. It was the reason I finally stopped asking whether soulmates exist. And when I told him, his reaction surprised me. My soulmate was never perfect. The moment I finally answered the question, "Do soulmates exist?" I was standing in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee while my children laughed in the next room. My husband was beside me, waiting for my answer. I looked at him and said, "I think soulmates are not found. They are built." He smiled, but I was not finished. I told him that I no longer believed a soulmate was a perfect person chosen by destiny. To me, a soulmate is someone who knows the imperfect version of you and still chooses to grow beside you. Someone who listens when the conversation is difficult. Someone who can say, "I was wrong." Someone who can hear "I need help" without turning it into a competition. Our life in the United States today is not a fairy tale. We still have busy mornings, work responsibilities, school schedules, bills, grocery shopping, and children who somehow need snacks approximately every 14 minutes. We still get tired. We still disagree. But now we know how to return to each other. That became our definition of love. My journal remained part of that journey. Every night, I wrote a few simple English sentences. Today I learned something. Today I was patient. Today I made a mistake. Today I loved my family. Then I read them aloud. Slowly. Clearly. Sometimes I repeated one sentence several times. This simple practice helped me improve my English listening, reading, and speaking, but it also helped me pay attention to my own life. I began seeing ordinary moments as meaningful. My husband bringing me coffee. My daughter laughing at the dinner table. My son asking an unexpected question. A quiet evening after a difficult day. These moments reminded me that happiness is rarely dramatic. Most of it hides inside ordinary Tuesday nights. I also learned that a healthy relationship is not defined by never having problems. It is defined by how two people handle problems. We learn to pause. We learn to apologize. We learn to ask questions instead of making assumptions. We learn to say simple words that once felt difficult. I love you. I am sorry. I understand. Can we try again? Those words became part of our family language. Looking back, I realize I was searching for a soulmate because I wanted certainty. I wanted someone who could guarantee that I would never be hurt again. But no human being can make that promise. What someone can offer is presence, honesty, respect, and the willingness to keep growing. That is what my husband gave me. And that is what I learned to give him. So, do soulmates exist? Maybe. But perhaps the more beautiful question is not, where is my soulmate? Maybe it is, who am I becoming while I love someone? Because sometimes the greatest love story is not finding a perfect person. It is two imperfect people becoming kinder, braver, and more patient together. And if you are learning English right now, remember my favorite lesson. You do not need perfect words to tell a meaningful story. You only need honest ones. I began with simple sentences, and somehow those sentences helped me understand my marriage, my family, and myself. My story did not become beautiful because life became perfect. It became beautiful because I stopped waiting for perfect. I started choosing what was real. And perhaps that is what a soulmate really is, not someone who completes your life, but someone who chooses to build it with you. One ordinary day at a time.